In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the power of the good old-fashioned telephone. President Trump says Apple CEO Tim Cook calls him directly when he wants to chat, unlike other executives. Will the conversations help Apple's case on trade? Plus, AI help wanted. The co-founder of Google's DeepMind is placed on leave. What's next for the high-profile artificial intelligence lab? And chasing e-tail in emerging markets, Amazon opens its largest campus to date in India. How the company is poised to capture an e-commerce market expected to more than triple in coming years. But first, to our top story. As the trade war rages on, it sounds like one CEO might actually be making progress in at least getting the president's ear. The secret? Phone calls. That's what President Trump told reporters at the White House Wednesday before he departed to Kentucky. Take a listen.
Oh, I have with everybody, but he's the one that calls me. You know why? That's why he's a great executive. Because he calls me, and others don't. Others go out and hire very expensive consultants, and Tim Cook calls Donald Trump directly. Pretty good. And I would take their call, too. But the only one that calls me is Tim Cook. He calls me whenever there's a problem. He'll call.
President Trump talking about Apple CEO Tim Cook there to discuss this and much more of what's happening in big tech. I want to welcome ARK Investment Management CEO Cathie Wood, who invests across the sector. Cathie, so great to have you here in the studio.
Great to be
in
here
San Francisco.
Yes.
So what do you make of the president's remarks there and Tim Cook's approach?
I think it's great. It's reconciliation. I think this is good news for Apple, good news for technology.
That said, the president has denied some of Apple's formal requests to give it a tariff reprieve on the Mac Pro, for example. So how much do you think that these tariffs are actually going to impact Apple, given that starting September 1st, we're supposed to see tariffs on AirPods, Apple Watch, etc.?
Well, I'm glad there's a dialogue, and I think this president wants U.S. companies to succeed. So I think at the end of the day, this is part of negotiations, and just that, and it will end in lower tariffs overall. That said, Apple has so many interesting things going for it right now. Apple TV, we're learning more about that. Apple Pay, what they're doing in healthcare. So I think they're also changing the subject a bit.
So as you consider where to put your money, are tariffs being factored into your consideration of Apple in particular? I mean, there's folks like Gene Munster of Loop Capital. He said many times now he doesn't believe tariffs will ever hit Apple, even though there's this threat.
Yeah.
But is it something that you're thinking about?
Sure, we think about taxes, which is what a tariff is. Taxes provide incentives or disincentives. So, not having a tax is better than having a tax. But we do think the services platform that Apple is building is going to overcome a lot of this and maybe even speed those services along.
So let's talk about services. We've got new details about Apple TV Plus this week. We're expecting it to be unveiled in November. There are new trailers out for some of the shows. And yet, of course, Netflix is the gorilla in the room. Disney's coming out with a service starting at $7 a month, which is fairly cheap compared to the competition.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure what Apple will be priced at yet. But how optimistic are you about Apple TV Plus?
Well, having learned that they're pouring $6 billion into the content, which is Netflix circa, I think, probably 2016.
Right, Netflix closer to $14 billion now.
Yes, yes. So I think they have a good shot. Some of the shows, I know the morning show with Jennifer Aniston, they're paying a lot for that. Each episode costing more than Game of Thrones. So, they're paying a lot. Content providers are the big winners here. But I do think that this is going to be not just a one-horse race. I think people will take several services, and it is problematic, though, for cable and traditional broadcast TV.
How much are you thinking about the antitrust issues, the DOJ opening an antitrust investigation into big tech in general, the FTC looking at Facebook, the states looking at big tech? There could be more.
Right. We do think about that. We have pulled back on many of the FANG names, or we had, partly because of this issue. We think it will be litigated for years and years. It took a long time to break the Ma Bell into the baby bells. That ended up working out okay for investors. So it's not always a bad thing, but the legal hassles, the distractions associated with it can be problematic for some companies.
So you're saying even if big tech is broken up, still potentially good for investors?
Not necessarily. Sometimes you'll go through the process, companies will go through the process like Microsoft did, and nothing happened. It's just a distraction. So I'd much prefer full attention on their businesses and not on these legal considerations. But the breakup of Ma Bell was not a bad thing. I'm not saying I would like to see this. I just don't know. Sometimes there's a solution. Meaning a breakup like that sometimes just never resolves.
Right. So given the antitrust issues, the geopolitical uncertainty, the economic uncertainty, the volatility of the markets, where are you putting your money across tech?
Yes, so we are invested in 5 platforms heavily. They're all focused on exponential growth, which should overcome everything we're talking about here, if we're right. And that's because the costs of these technologies are falling so quickly. When we talk about DNA sequencing, so Illumina and CRISPR gene editing, Editas, Intellia, and CRISPR Therapeutics, these stocks are not priced for the exponential growth we believe that they're going to deliver during the next 5 to 10 years. Same thing with Tesla, autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles first. We think electric vehicles are going to go from 1.5 million units globally last year sold to 26 million in 5 years. That's almost 20-fold growth. No one's expecting that. Autonomous taxi networks, no one believes that's going to happen. So we're investing in opportunities that we believe are not discounted in the marketplace at all. In the case of gene editing, shall we say, those 3 companies together, we're talking about curing disease here, are valued at only $5 billion. Apple closer to $1 trillion. These are life-saving companies. So we are not worried about tariffs in terms of our largest holdings.
Interesting. You mentioned Tesla. Every week there seems to be some new Tesla controversy. Last week we were talking about a rental car company that canceled orders of 85 Teslas because they were receiving cars. The cars were scratched. There was moisture in the headlights. This week we're learning more about a lawsuit, Walmart suing Tesla because they had rented roofing space to Tesla's energy unit, which was formerly Solar City.
Yes.
And there were multiple fires, 7 fires,
yes,
out of like 200 different leases.
Yeah.
You know, like how, obviously you're bullish on electric cars in general, but are you as bullish on Tesla if they cannot overcome some of these issues?
Well, I think what we're seeing here, for example, we hear about every fire in a car that takes place, but you don't hear, in terms of traditional gas-powered cars, how many fires are taking place with those. Many, many more than Tesla. But Tesla seems to be a lightning rod for publicity. Last week it was a German rental car company, and Tesla's response to that is, we don't think that's the issue. We think we have a dispute, a former dispute with them, which they're not going to go into, and that's what it's more about. And they can say all they want. I would be very surprised, especially going to Germany, Tesla shipping cars to Germany, and how auto-oriented they are and design-oriented they are, if Tesla would have shipped that many faulty cars. There is quality control at the end of the day, at the end of production. And then Walmart, that was those solar panels were put in place when Solar City was a standalone company, and they'll probably have to replace them or pay for pulling them out and then pay some compensation as well. It's a one-shot deal. This is when I talk about electric vehicles going from 1.5 million to 26 million units in 5 years, that's going to be a much more important impact on Tesla, especially if it continues to maintain its share. We've assumed that they're going to lose a third to two-thirds of their share in our $600 to $6,000 bear and bull price targets. They've been sustaining their shares. It's pretty astounding.
All right, Cathie Wood, ARK Investments, always good to have you here on the show.
Thank
you so much
Thank
for
you,
stopping
Emily.
by.
Thank you.
Switching to e-commerce, shares of Target set an all-time high today. The retailer boosting its earnings forecast for the year. Target also reported that digital sales were up 34% in the second quarter. Coming up, President Trump says he's the chosen one to take on China, that is. We'll discuss the ongoing U.S.-China trade dispute with a former ambassador who says tariffs are not working. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Also listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg.
I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it. So I'm taking on China. I'm taking on China on trade. And you know what? We're winning.
President Trump earlier Wednesday talking about taking on China in regards to trade. Tuesday, Ambassador Charles Reese took his thoughts on the ongoing U.S.-China trade dispute to the LA Times in an op-ed, writing, quote, if, as a result, Chinese and U.S. companies in a variety of high-tech sectors no longer compete in the U.S. marketplace, it could have the unintended consequence of pushing China to clinch market leadership elsewhere. Ambassador Reese joins us now from Washington. He is the Vice President of International at RAND Corporation with more than 3 decades of diplomatic service for the U.S. government around the world. And Ambassador, I have to start with, look, there are many presidents who have dealt with China, had to deal with China. What is your reaction to President Trump calling himself the chosen one on China?
Well, I try and stay out of politics. Obviously, the president is very sure of himself, and he's trying to point out how central he is to decision-making on this. And in that, it's right. He's right.
So you don't think tariffs are going to work. Why?
Well, I go back to the original objective. The president started this whole process with an investigation of technology policy for foreign direct investors, for U.S. companies investing in China. And he put the first tranche of the first group of tariffs on because he found, as others have found, that the Chinese require technology sharing, licensing, co-investment, all kinds of rather discriminatory things for companies interested in investing in China. And so the president said, well, this is a denial of our rights. It's an unfair trade practice, and I'm going to put big tariffs on. But in fact, the president and the administration really didn't support U.S. companies investing in China. So it seems to me that the original purpose of this trade war wasn't really the real purpose. The real purpose is to detach the U.S. economy from the Chinese economy, and somehow to rectify the bilateral trade deficit.
So, in your view, as the war, trade dispute, trade tensions, whatever you call it, is playing out now, who wins, who loses?
No one wins in a trade war. Trade wars are basically take both sides down. When there is action and retaliation, the barriers go up between the two trading partners, and all the other countries in the system win.
So, how do you believe this will play out? I mean, we've talked about the unpredictability here. We never know what's going to happen the next day. But given your understanding of how the Chinese government operates and what we're seeing from the president, how does this play out, and how does it impact emerging technologies?
Well, I think that the Chinese are digging in for the long term. I think that they're open to an interim agreement with the president. They know from the statements that the U.S. officials have made that we're most sensitive about the farm products, farm exports to China, which have been cut off by the Chinese in retaliation for our actions. And so they're going to demand a very high price in terms of reduction of our tariffs on Chinese goods in order to give us that benefit. So it's going to be sticky. It's possible that they'll do a half a deal, but I don't think that we'll see in the next, between now and next November of 2020, a big reduction in a return to the status quo before this ratcheting retaliatory sequence started, because it's not. You can't see the interests being benefited. The result is going to be that the competition in high tech and other areas will take place in the rest of the world. And that's where you have to worry. American companies depend on Chinese components to be competitive all over in the rest of the world. And the big game now is for high tech, 5G networks, everything else in the rest of the world. And this will hamper American companies in the rest of the world.
So speaking of 5G, obviously Huawei is the leader in 5G. Huawei has become a pawn in the US-China trade dispute. And right now, you do have other players in 5G, but many experts say they don't compare to Huawei. So how does that position the U.S. in terms of leadership or not on 5G, which is going to be a very important emerging technology?
Well, it certainly is, and it's early days in the 5G race. I remember how Motorola dominated the early cell phone competitive landscape 20 plus years ago, and the first mover doesn't necessarily win, so there's that. The other thing, though, is that we learned in the digital mobile market, the so-called second generation mobile market, that the global market mattered. There were two competing systems. There was a European system, GSM, and an American system called CDMA. And CDMA, many people think, was maybe better technically, but GSM won, and it was the European system, and it was on the basis of GSM that Nokia and Ericsson became major players in mobile telephony. And it was because their system was available and used in more countries all over the world. And so Apple adopted it. I think that that's what's going to happen in 5G. You cannot look at 5G on a country-by-country basis. The successful players in 5G will be global players.
Okay. Ambassador Charles Rees, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, a social media double standard. That's what China is accusing Twitter and Facebook of. Why the crackdown on state-run, quote, social media is drawing China's ire. That is next. This is Bloomberg. JP Morgan Chase is preparing to shut down its Chase Pay app. It is the bank's third reversal on digital products in as many months. JP Morgan started telling customers Wednesday they'll no longer be able to pay with their smartphones when shopping in stores. However, customers will still be able to use Chase Pay on the websites and apps of retailers that accept it. 2 days after Twitter and Facebook announced they closed accounts backed by the Chinese government attempting to manipulate news in Hong Kong, Beijing is hitting back. An editorial in the People's Daily newspaper saying, quote, this is a full display of double standard in action, saying one thing while doing another. They suppressed Chinese netizens' voices, but can't suppress people's motivation to reveal the truth. To tell us more, Bloomberg Tech Sarah Fryer, who covers Twitter and Facebook for us. What does the Chinese government mean there?
Well, okay, I think that there's a lot going on. First of all, that editorial said that there was no evidence given for the fact that this influence came from the Chinese government. But there is a little bit of evidence. If you look at Twitter's blog post, they say that some IP addresses were unblocked from using the apps in the country. The editorial also didn't say that Twitter and Facebook are blocked by the government for all citizens. And so this is the kind of thing, they were just told they can't advertise on Twitter anymore. I mean, this is a tense moment. Meanwhile, Shelley Banjo and I have reported that Twitter, the company, has been training Chinese government officials behind the scenes on how to use Twitter and helping verify them.
So let's talk about this. Twitter employees are helping Chinese government officials get their word out, get their message out on Twitter.
If you think about it, it's just like they would for any other public official. If there's a celebrity or an athlete or an actress, they are going to be helping that person get verified on Twitter, learn how to use Twitter. The weird thing here, though, is this is a government that is blocked has blocked Twitter for years. And so it does seem a little strange to be training those government officials to be using the platform in a way so they can get their message out to people in other countries.
And obviously Twitter does this with other governments. Twitter is a global company. They are based in the US. How do they navigate or even justify the ethical complications of this when it's a government that doesn't necessarily share American values?
Well, I think that the argument here is that all officials should be treated the same way, no matter, you know, if it's Trump or if it's Bolsonaro, it doesn't really matter.
So they'll help anyone?
They'll help anyone with their Twitter accounts, just like Facebook will help anyone with their Facebook accounts. We reported a couple years ago that Facebook has been training Duterte in the Philippines on how to use Facebook, and Modi in India. They just think of it in terms of content. Are these people who have a following that people are going to want to see what they have to say? If so, if they're going to say it anywhere, might as well train them to say it on our service.
What is Twitter saying about this?
So far, the company hasn't really been commenting on this, but we are confident in our sources here.
And Twitter has, in this same week, decided to block state-run media from advertising on Twitter. So they are taking a stand, in a sense, there, a political stand.
Well, in a way, right? Because now they have the tricky job of defining what state-run media is. They've already said that they're going to exclude the taxpayer-funded yet independently operated entities like the BBC and, you know, NPR gets some federal funding here in the United States. But they have not said exactly which media properties they will be removing from advertising capabilities. So we know that they will be removing the ones in China. We know that they've removed the ones in Russia. But this kind of opens up the opportunity for them to decide on a case-by-case basis if they see a big propaganda initiative, what they want to cancel.
All right. Bloomberg Tech's Sarah Fryer, thank you, and great scoop. Coming up, Amazon is betting big on India, really big. How the company is going to head-to-head with Walmart in the emerging retail market with its largest campus ever. Next, this is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Amazon is doubling down on India. The e-commerce giant has opened its largest campus to date in the South Indian city of Hyderabad as it battles Walmart for one of the fastest growing retail markets. Walmart spent $16 billion last year on acquiring the Indian online retailer Flipkart. In comparison, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos had previously pledged $5.5 billion toward the company's operations in the country. Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor of Global Tech, Brad Stone, also the author of a book about Amazon called The Everything Store. You've traveled to India to report on Amazon, Brad. So why put its largest campus in India?
Amazon has a lot of employees in India, as all the tech companies do, right? Lots of engineers, lots of contractors there. Amazon, I think, has over 60,000 employees there. A third are in Hyderabad. So already a big presence, and housing them all together, you know, probably a smart move. Now, I think the bigger thing is, why are they making such a big deal about this, right? It's one office building. Well, you know, they've been trying to grow inside India in an unfavorable regulatory environment now for 5 years. Last December, the Modi government passed laws that made it very difficult for them to run their conventional retail website in India. They have to behave more like a marketplace where other sellers sell on the site. So, putting a big stake in the ground, some shovels in the ground, literally helping with Modi's economic development project, saying we're hiring people in India, it's probably a smart political move as well.
Now, the biggest office for Amazon in Seattle holds 5,000 people. This will hold 15,000 people. It's mostly existing workers? Or are they going to be adding new people?
I think probably both. I think they're growing in India, quite fast. Not just engineers that service other parts of India, but trying to grow that e-commerce business. My colleague Saritha Ray in India has reported that Amazon is looking at potentially acquiring a food delivery business, either from Ola or Uber Eats. They've been looking at making investments in lots of brick and mortar chains, some grocery store chains. So, in India can be the kind of lab for the rest of Amazon, and they also need to hire workers there to help them grow their business in the country.
How is Amazon actually doing in taking on Walmart in India? Who's winning?
It's a good question. The last I saw, those businesses were about neck and neck. Flipkart, the company that Walmart acquired for, I think, $16 billion last year, had a head start. There was some kind of internal chaos there. Walmart came and bought them. The founders have left. Flipkart's doing pretty well. But Amazon, Prime is taking off. They don't release numbers, but they say that Prime membership is doubling. I think, look, they're probably both doing well because this is a rapidly expanding internet market. It's a country of 1.3 billion people, a rising middle class. Internet penetration's going way up, so it's kind of that, lifting tide, raising all boats.
Walmart is trying to take on Amazon by offering free streaming, and obviously Bollywood entertainment in India is huge. Talk about that strategy.
I think Amazon has shown that Prime Video brings people into the Amazon ecosystem. It gets them ordering. Walmart can't necessarily do that in the U.S. where you've got so many players spending a lot of money. But the India streaming market's a little less developed. They're taking a different approach. It's free. It's just, I believe, in Flipkart's mobile app. You got to go sort of discover it in a drop-down menu. But Flipkart thinks this is a good way to kind of cement the loyalty of its users, and probably particularly those second and third tier cities where maybe the wealthier urban customer already has an Amazon Prime or a Netflix subscription. Walmart's trying to expand into those smaller cities, and video is a way to bring them into the Flipkart ecosystem.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the trade dispute and the threat to big tech companies. Amazon doesn't have huge exposure to China, but what we have seen in the last few weeks, we've seen Walmart and Target report strong results. We've seen Alibaba report strong results. And I wonder if there's something about e-commerce that is more immune to these geopolitical uncertainties that we're facing now, and that other companies might be facing more
I would say Amazon does have some exposure. Even though they don't have a big Chinese business, China is kind of the breadbasket for Amazon. So many of those sellers sell around the world on Amazon.com. They're in Shenzhen. They're in the factories, making products that are for sale. And some of those companies will get hit by the tariffs as they're put into place by the Trump administration. India, you would think, might be a recipient of some of the capital that's leaving China, but the political environment there has been unstable. I mentioned the e-commerce rules that went into effect last year around foreign direct investment. So Modi got reelected in May. I think the political environment's maybe a little more clear, a little more stable now. So we'll see how it will impact, the trade war will impact India. But it hasn't historically been the greatest place for foreign investment. There's, it's very, very bureaucratic.
Meantime, Amazon also announced expanding into Portland today. This, of course, on the back of the backlash to HQ2 in New York. It's still moving forward with plans in Northern Virginia, in Tennessee. They can't really keep expanding in Seattle in the United States. So are we going to see just a more dispersed Amazon?
You wonder if those Long Island City politicians are kicking themselves now, because every day there's a new press release about Amazon expansion. They encountered some political headwinds in Seattle. They started growing across the lake in Bellevue. They had problems in Long Island City. They're doubling down on their location in Virginia. And now Portland, So Amazon's an expanding company. I can't remember the numbers, but it's something like 600,000 or 700,000 employees. They got to put them somewhere.
3,500, more than 3,500 full-time jobs in Oregon since
right.
2010, and obviously
they're a company that's bet again and again on urban areas to attract a young worker, and they're looking for places that want them. And they seem to have found that in Portland.
All right, our senior executive editor of Global Tech, Brad Stone, thank you so much for stopping by. Sticking with Amazon, the big three of cloud computing, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, now face a threat that is literally at the edges of their networks. More people and companies need their computing power close to them, not at remote data centers, and that's going to hand a huge opportunity to wireless carriers building fast 5G networks to handle the job. But it will also put pressure on the big three to team up with the wireless companies. Joining us to discuss, Chetan Sharma, CEO of Chetan Sharma Consulting, who wrote a report on this topic. So Chetan, first of all, can you describe to us in layman's terms, what is edge computing? What is this need for computing at the so-called edge?
Sure. So if you look at the traditional way of cloud computing, generally Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have data centers around the world, and that's where all the applications and the content gets served from. So instead of the centralized cloud system, you have these resources available at the edge or very close to the consumer. And so this edge could be something like the same kind of resources available on a base station near a neighborhood, or these could be metro data centers, or it could be some other kind of mini data centers that people are starting to build. And so the idea is, instead of a data center which is hundreds or thousands of miles away, it could be only a few miles away.
So who does this give an advantage to, and does it put Amazon, Microsoft, Google at a disadvantage with their cloud businesses?
I think it does put them at a certain disadvantage, because the centralized clouds business is pretty straightforward in the sense that you build the data centers and you make it available for the developers. For the edge business, you really need to partner with the players who have real estate assets at the edge, and generally these are the mobile operators or the tower companies or the metro data center providers. And as such, they have to string together a number of these partnerships around the world to make that fabric that developers like, where they can access these applications at the edge. But this also means that newer players will enter the ecosystem. It's not just the top 3 or top 5 of the cloud computing guys that will dominate the edge ecosystem. I think given the distributed nature of the entire edge framework, you're likely to see many more players in every country emerge and work with the ecosystem and the developers to essentially provide edge services to newer set of applications and services.
So then how does our conception of the cloud, or what the cloud is, change, let's say 5 years from now?
So I feel that a lot of the data processing that happens at the cloud will definitely move at the edge. A lot of the AI modeling that takes place in the cloud will move towards the edge, and the centralized cloud system, it will primarily be used for data storage or longer computational models that takes many hours. But the rest of the computing will move towards the edge wherever it's needed. And so I think we'll see a re-architecture of the network as well as the internet take place over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what's exciting about the opportunity, and that's also the challenge of the industry, as to how do you string together a platform that's abstracted for the developers so that they don't get lost in the complexity.
Okay, fascinating. Chetan Sharma, Consulting CEO. Chetan Sharma, taking us to the edge there. Thank you. Coming up, a shakeup at Google's AI lab. Why the man who co-founded DeepMind is no longer at the helm. That is next. This is Bloomberg. The trading division at Goldman Sachs is going on a hiring spree. Here's the catch. Only coders need apply. Goldman wants to add more than 100 engineers for tech-related roles on the trading floor. The hires will help to build out of Marquee, Goldman's trading and risk management platform. And speaking of tech jobs, there could be a big one up for grabs at Google. Google has placed the co-founder of its DeepMind AI lab on leave. Mustafa Suleyman, who runs DeepMind's applied division, has been placed on leave following controversy over some of the projects that he led. In the UK, for example, a data privacy watchdog said DeepMind was illegally given access to 1.6 million patients' medical records. To tell us more, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen, who covers Alphabet for us. So first of all, remind us what DeepMind is and all of the controversy surrounding it.
Yeah, so DeepMind is a lab out of the UK. They started in 2010. Google bought them in 2014. It sort of set off this renaissance in artificial intelligence. We have the computing power and these new algorithms that can do things in pattern recognition and image recognition that we'd never been able to do before. DeepMind has always been working on what they call artificial general intelligence, which is to make machines as smart as humans. They've shown more progress than arguably any other company. And then Mustafa was working on their applied research, primarily in the health. So they have these partnerships in the UK. They've been exploring other work in the US. And as you noted, that's had some big privacy backlash in the UK in particular. And it's certainly had a lot of resonance here with the US around ethics and AI. DeepMind, Mustafa has talked a lot about that their AI is so powerful, you're going to have to need some ethical constraints. They built up this AI ethics panel they talked about when they were initially bought by Google, but what the actual negotiations and work that they're doing has been a little bit unclear.
He's been sort of the public face of DeepMind. This UK situation happened 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Why now, and what's happened in between? I'm
not sure. Our reporting doesn't show exactly why he's been on leave. So he's been more of Demis Hassabis is the sort of boy genius founder of the company, and Mustafa's been the more what they call emotional intelligence, EQ, in Silicon Valley, the more practical face.
Do we know how much AI is? We know that AI is being incorporated into Google. They talk about it on every earnings call. They're very optimistic about how AI will improve the product and also the bottom line. Do we know how DeepMind is actually being integrated into Alphabet and Google?
They've talked about a couple different projects. One is around energy efficiency in their data centers. They've talked, some of their algorithms have gone into making Android more efficient. My sense is that Larry Page, the CEO of Alphabet, wants DeepMind to just work on this research to just, it's solving a moonshot, right? The work they're trying to solve is making machines as intelligent as human, and they have a pretty long leash.
So who takes over in his place?
I'm not sure that someone's necessarily going to take over. I mean, there's a lot of the applied work, particularly in healthcare, has been shifted over to Google. They hired an executive from Geisinger Health last year, and has been running a lot of that.
Meantime, there is an update to your YouTube Kids story, which we talked about yesterday, in that there are a number of competitors who are trying to fill the gap that YouTube Kids might not be quite able to serve, right?
Yeah, I think this story was looking at some video services that have been pitching themselves as, listen, YouTube Kids is, if you're a parent, you're nervous about it for a variety of reasons. If you're a regulator, you're now nervous about it for privacy reasons. Okay, we are safe for parents. We look at every single video on the service, and we're compliant with the federal rules, which right now the YouTube is in this settlement with the FTC about whether or not they've been complying with those same rules.
So who are the competitors? I mean, I'm a parent. I want to know.
Yeah, the one I talked about was this British service called Super Awesome, which is a hilarious name. And they have this new video service called Ruckus, which is also a great name. There is a service in the UK called Highbrow, which you can guess is sort of meant to be, it's subscription based. It's very curated. It's only select
highly
creators.
Intellectual content for kids.
Roku is one we mentioned briefly, but Roku is also earlier this week put out their family and kids and family service. They talk about that as being edited. Roku is, I think, over 30 million people, so that's something that could have a lot more reach and probably put a bigger dent into YouTube than, say, some of these upstarts right now.
Right. Well, anything to give us a break from Paw Patrol. Good to know. Thank you, Bloomberg's Mark Bergen. Appreciate you stopping by. Still ahead, we continue our conversation on the back and forth over tariffs, how ports and terminals may take a serious hit if President Trump does enforce them. Next, this is Bloomberg. The cinematic future of one of Marvel Comics' most beloved characters is, well, up in the air. Bloomberg has learned that a dispute between Sony and Disney threatens to end their co-production of Spider-Man movies. Disney wants a much bigger share of the profits. Well, Next Trucking is a tech platform connecting shippers with owners, operators, and small fleets. It's used for freight booking, which in the logistics world relied mostly on phone calls and faxes. Well, Next is making this transaction easier to set up through an app. The company has raised $125 million from investors, including Sequoia Capital, and has most recently been valued at $500 million. And while business is good for now, the continued tension between China and the United States over tariffs could impact the company. Joining us to discuss, Next CEO Lydia Yan. Lydia, thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, has your business at all been impacted, or what trends are you seeing in shipping in the midst of this trade dispute?
Well, logistics industry overall is very seasonal. Second half is usually our peak season. But last year, this time, we actually saw a surge in volumes because a lot of shippers were trying to push in the volume before the tariff kicked in. And the terminals, especially in Southern California, terminals were congested, and there was severe shortage of truck drivers, warehousing capacities, even chassis. And this year, we also see some of the shippers are trying to push in volumes before the peak season because of the uncertainties on tariff situations. But most of the shippers are actually dealing with capacity issues because they're really trying to figure out what they're trying to do next year. Are they going to stay profitable with the tariff and also to increase the price from steamship lines?
So what happens then during peak season if this trade war is still in the state that it's in, where, you know, potentially a new round of tariffs on September 1st and then again December 15th?
Well, we will see more uncertainties from the shippers' behavior for sure, because right now we see a different behavior from the shippers comparing with last year this time. Shippers are really reacting to the different tariff, and a lot of shippers are trying to really react to the tariff impact. So it's very different for comparing to last year, and it's very difficult for small trucking companies to react to it. In trucking industry, 90% of the trucking companies are very small ones, and those small business owners are struggling to really help their employees to put the food on the table right now.
So tell us a little bit more about the role you play in this relationship between vendors and customers and trying to get goods from point A to point B across an ocean or two.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So tell us a little bit more about your relationship and your position in the relationship between vendors and customers and the ability to get from point A to point B, maybe across an ocean, across a continent as well.
Yeah, we're the first trucker-centric marketplace connecting shippers with small trucking companies with focus on port drayage. Port drayage is really the first mile of any imported goods. So we're really in the forefront of international shippings. For Next Trucking, we give our shippers transparency. They can really streamline the whole process, and that they can really track and trace their loads real time, retrieve the proof of delivery when the load's delivered, so they can really bill their buyers a lot earlier so they can increase their cash flow. And for carriers, we really wanted to empower the drivers with technologies, especially small trucking companies, allow them to take more loads, become more efficient, drivers make more money, because trucker shortage is really the #1 problem of our industry right now. And the next is really empowered to serve the truckers and allow them to come back and to the industry so we can really help the industry to balance supply and demand.
So if the trade war continues to escalate, are you concerned? We've already also got protests happening in Hong Kong. Are you concerned about an impact to your business?
Well, the flow of goods still come into the port because, we do have the consumption needs in the country. And of course, there's the biggest issue is really the volatilities and the fluctuations of the flow of the goods, because last year is very different from this year. And also shippers are trying to adjust to the situations and also tariffs and also Hong Kong situations. But at the end of the day, all the shipping costs, the delay at the port, and also the cost from the merge, per diem, and the extra chassis will apply to the end consumers like you and me.
So you're saying that the Hong Kong protests in particular haven't had any impact at all?
Right now, we haven't seen it yet because the largest port overseas is probably Shanghai, not necessarily Hong Kong. But we probably will see some situations happen later on, but we haven't seen any impact at this point.
All right, Lydia Yen, CEO of Next Trucking, thanks for sharing your perspective with us. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We're live streaming on Twitter. Check us out there at Technology and follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.